Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mighty Blaze Friday Frontliner. I'm Jenna Blum. I'm one of the co-founders of The Blaze. And in case you are new to The Blaze and Friday Frontliners, we are a group of 30 creative professional volunteers who are dedicated to connecting writers and readers in the age of COVID and beyond. If you like what you see here, please give us a follow. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss anything. And please subscribe to our newsletter at amightyblaze.com so you never, ever have literary FOMO. It's a very dangerous condition. You don't want that. Today, I am greatly privileged to be here with Lydia Millet. I should have actually asked if that's how you pronounce your last name. Haha.
That is quite right. It's just like the grain that hippies and birds eat.
All right, then I know exactly how to pronounce it. I woke at 4 a.m. thinking, but it might be Millet in the French way, and then I forgot to write that down to ask you. So,
yeah, no.
Well, welcome, Lydia Millet. Her latest book, although she has written 14 books that are both novels and short story collections, over half of them, P.S., have been nominated for the Pulitzer, which is one of the things that I would love to ask about. Meanwhile, her latest book is a children's Bible, which if you have not read it yet, you have such a treat in store. Ron Charles at the Washington Post called it, and I just loved this, a tornado tearing along an unpredictable path through our complacency about climate change. And another reviewer called it Lord of the Flies for the climate change era, which I thought was so apt. I myself had been describing it to friends when recommending it as a sort of really snarky band of teenagers narrating the apocalypse after a climate change event and living through the subsequent dystopia, which is kind of my favorite thing to read. So I came to this book through word of mouth. I utterly loved it. I listened to it. Now I'm passing out the galleys to all of my friends. I just want to also read Lydia's bio just to, sort of further embarrass you, Lydia, or make you glow with enjoyment at everything you have accomplished. Lydia Millet has written more than a dozen novels and story collections, 14, often about the ties between people and other animals and the crisis of extinction. She has in her collection, Fight No More, I love the titles, Sweet Lamb of Heaven, Mermaids in Paradise, Magnificence, Ghost Lights, Love in Infant Monkeys, and more, but those are all the titles that were nominated for the Pulitzer. A children's Bible is also a finalist for the National Book Award. She writes essays, opinion pieces, and I love this, other ephemera, and has worked as an editor and staff writer at the Center for Biological Diversity since 1999. So I'm sure you have seen a lot of really disturbing and alarming changes. You live in the desert outside Tucson with your children and your boyfriend. Is that still accurate? Sound good?
That is. That's pretty accurate.
All right, good, because I stole that right from your website. So I'm hoping that it is accurate. So I sort of gave the thumbnail description of what I perceived a children's Bible to be, but would you describe it for readers in your own words, please?
Well, it is a story about a group of teenagers and children who are sort of forced to spend the summer in this big old sort of robber baron mansion in the Northeast in the country with their parents who haven't seen each other since college. And so the children don't know each other at all. And but right when they get there, they have their all their devices, phones, tablets, and everything confiscated. And so they decide to play this game. And because they're really ashamed of their parents and want to renounce them, the game basically consists of being the last one standing who hasn't had their particular parents identified, connected to them. So you're basically trying to avoid being linked with a certain set of parents. They're just so repulsed by their parents and so disgusted by them that's the game they decide to play. But then this storm comes and everything sort of devolves into chaos. And we look at how the kids respond to the chaos and also how the parents do. Does that sound right, Jenna?
Yeah, I think that sounds great. And that's just the beginning of the story, you guys. So what happens as the climate shifts and the children have to become more competent than the parents, and how they take control and sort of rebuild society in the aftermath. It was very Lord of the Fliesian, except very updated, I thought. And the teenage speak and jargon was so lively and so of the moment, so pitch perfect, that I was having like sort of ugly cringes throughout the whole book, because I'm like, oh my gosh, if I had a teenager, this is probably exactly how she or he would view me, as like this repulsive blob. It's very, very fresh and very vivid and a little bit alarming. But the humanity of the children comes to the surface like cream in coffee as the book continues, and the parents continue to be completely useless, which is, pretty much, I think, how I would be in that situation. Like, why isn't my hair iron turning on when the electrical grid is like completely gone? Like, oh my God, where do I get Botox? And the kids are having their eyes on the ball more. Do you, when you're writing this was not an anticipated question, but it just popped up. Do you put yourself in that situation? What would happen if suddenly the climate experienced a big disturbance?
I'm not sure if I do that consciously. I think, we must sort of have some, as writers and as readers, but we must have some kind of unconscious series of click-ins of empathy that we don't really have to strive for in a calculated way, right? To sort of imagine ourselves into scenarios. But I don't do anything like that deliberately. I just sort of engage in some form of like automatic writing where I just, I just kind of sit down and I think, I kind of have two modes, and one is dialogue and the other is interior monologue. And that's just sort of either I'm on one track or I'm on another, and I just get carried away with it and kind of go where it leads to a certain degree.
Was it fun to write the dialogue for the narrator and for the other kids?
It's always fun. It's always fun to write dialogue. In fact, I have to cut out dialogue, and I had to cut out characters from this because there was too much talking and too many different people, which usually isn't my problem, but it was a problem here. I had more children to start out with, but you couldn't like follow them. It was too big of a crowd. So I had to, sadly kill off some of them.
You killed some children. You would fit right into my writing workshop. We have a novel workshop that meets for Grub Street writers every Sunday night, and we have many killers in the class. We especially kill babies and stray plot lines. So welcome.
Sometimes you have to, no matter how cute they are, right?
You do, and especially if they're cute, I find. There are no really cute, precious children in your book. I feel as though there's one character who is the proverbial conscience of the novel, but that child is also not cute. And the rest of the children present to me as I think children should, and that so many people writing about children get wrong. They are their own people. And then you capture the people as opposed to thinking about them as children first. And I loved that. So you're not playing the survival game in your head while you're writing this. Like, what would happen if, all the power went out, or a big wave came, or animals came into my treehouse kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. Well, I had to, sometimes I sort of do a little research on things. Sometimes we're forced to slightly step outside our own minds and into the world of data. I mean, we hope to avoid it whenever possible, right? But so I did do a little research on things like what happens to stormwater, what does it have in it? Things like that, that I just actually didn't know. What would end up if a lake overflowed its banks and contained all this kind of runoff, how toxic would that be? But in terms of like sort of projecting myself into the scene, I think I probably did less of that than arguably I should, if that answers your question.
It does. I respectfully disagree. I found the scenes very vivid and very convincing. And I know I used to be engaged to somebody who covered hurricanes, was a National Geographic photographer who covered severe weather. Wow. And one of the dangers of the aftermath of severe weather is the water, because it carries all sorts of bleep in it. I mean, really bad things.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I was fascinated with balls of fire ants in particular. I made him tell me about the fire ants many times, to the point at which he was like, I don't really want to talk about the fire ants anymore. But it's I think you replicated that beautifully in the book.
Good. I want to hear more about the fire ants at some point, but
I will happily. I'll send you all of my YouTube videos about the fire ants. Unlike you, when I research a book, I do the method research. So I'm like, oh, if there's a treehouse in this book, I now have to live in a treehouse for 2 weeks. You didn't do that, did you?
Wow. No, that would have been kind of fun though. I like treehouses.
All right. Well, next book you can like do a sequel and have another treehouse with fire ants in it, or
I love the idea of method writing, though. I didn't even know that was a thing, really.
It is a thing. One of my readers kindly called the kind of research I do method research, and which involves recreating the situation as much as possible. But I have to say, Lydia, this is why I have 3 books and you have 14 books, because the method research is a lot of procrastination and it takes a lot of time. Like you probably don't need to do that.
Yeah. It sounds resource intensive for sure.
Yeah, it's expensive and sort of strange. I buy a lot of costumes. Anyway, okay, so enough about that. What was the genesis of the children's Bible? What is the original puzzle piece that you first put on the table?
Let's see. I think it was just the idea of children rejecting their parents at a certain moment, inspired to some degree, although my own children are very kind in many ways, also inspired by their sort of, becoming teenagers and suddenly, being more embarrassed of me than they had before. So it started there, and it started from actually wanting to go back to a place that I'd once been in real life, which this robber baron house is modeled on. That's in the lower peaks of the Adirondacks, a place I thought was really beautiful. I sort of wanted to go back there, so I started writing a story that was set there, and kind of went from there. I knew I wanted the book to be about anger, like sort of this righteous anger of the young at the inactivism and passivity of my own generation. I knew it wanted to be about that, and I knew I wanted to have a picture Bible in it of the kind that I found at my mother's childhood home. Like the picture Bibles, the story Bibles from Bible stories, or story Bibles from the 40s and 50s, that were kind of illustrated the way this cover of my book is, right?
Oh, so beautiful. Thank you so much for holding it up. It's so pretty. The cover of the book, you guys, is gorgeous. If you're listening to this on the podcast, you can't see it, but check it out. It is a really beautiful cover. It looks like there are woodcut animals on the front.
Yeah, exactly. But you recognize that sort of style as a sort of 50s, 40s kind of evocation, right? So like the illustrated Bibles that I found at my mother's childhood home were all sort of, the ones that were illustrated had this particular combination of cuteness and eeriness in the illustrations that I just found really compelling. And they also were canonical, they all had the same stories in them, that were deemed appropriate for children's sort of introduction to the Bible, and so I sort of wanted to embed something about the aesthetic of those Bibles and their sort of canonical nature in the story. So that's kind of where I started.
It's an interesting mashup. Stephen King talks about his story and his novel ideas often coming to him as the collision of 2 pool balls, that there's one idea and there's another idea and they collide somehow, and that impact point is where this whole story or book then grows from. And that's what this sounds like to me, is the mashup of robber baron, teen eschewing of parents, and the very specific kind of children's Bibles you're talking about. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good way of seeing it.
Yeah. I want to know where the robber baron house is. Can you tell us what house it is?
Yeah, for sure. I've been to 2 writers, what do you call them? Like writers' colonies, retreats. Retreats, yeah. Exactly. Yeah, in my whole life. One was at the MacDowell Colony, and it was just like, I think the summer before last, like the summer before the pandemic. And that was lovely. But the other time was many years ago, at a place called Blue Mountain Center, which is on Blue Mountain Lake. And that is the place that I was thinking of. It's really, really beautiful. And it's just in the part of the Adirondacks that's sort of more slow and rolling and not the big peaks, and it's within a few hours of New York. You can take the train pretty close, not all the way there. And it's just, it's this beautiful old sort of log cabin. It's sort of mansion and sort of log cabin put together. And all the little bedrooms inside are like these it's sort of like a beehive, with these tiny kind of cozy rooms in this really vast place. So anyway, and it has a little dock just like the one. It doesn't have, it's not on the ocean as the place in the novel is. So the place in the novel is on a lake, and then there's a stream and it goes out to the ocean. And this place is nowhere near the ocean, right, in real life. But the rest of it is kind of true. Lots of deer ambling on the lawn, and these really placid lakes with loons calling, at night. And the grounds are very much like what I described in the book too. Anyway, I recommend that Blue Mountain Center. It's lovely.
It sounds beautiful. Now everybody listening is going to make a mass exodus to the Blue Mountain Center, which, by the way, sounds like a fairly good place to be in terms of climate change if we're thinking about rising seas, since it's inland and not actually on the ocean. So I will see you there when we have these cataclysmic events.
It's probably safer. Yeah, it's probably definitely a safer
Probably
bet.
a little bit safer. It was a beautiful place to visit. Did you get to go there while you were working? Did you stay there while you were writing the book at all?
Stay where?
At the Blue Mountain Center.
Yeah, that's where I lived. So it's like one of those retreats where you just like live right on there, and they give you meals. They give you don't have to cook or anything, which is great for me because I can't cook. So yeah, it's a great place. You apply, and if they pick you, you get to. I think I was there for at least 4 weeks, maybe 6. It was lovely.
Yeah, it sounds beautiful. And is that the amount of time it took for the book to be born?
Well, it was so long ago. I was just kind of hearkening back to it. I wished to go back there, but I actually was there in 1998. So ages ago, right? And I wrote a whole other book there. I wrote a book called My Happy Life, which was only, I guess, my 3rd book to come out. So that's what I wrote there. But I did do a whole draft of a book there. That's the great thing about those retreats, is that you just can write all day, which I don't really have the luxury of in my normal life anymore.
That was one of the things I'm going to ask about, is how you balance what I perceive as your climate activism with your position at the Center for Biodiversity, with writing, with having teenagers. How do you balance all of those things?
So my job at the center, I'm an editor there, and I do some writing, and I've worked for a long time for the center. I first started in 1999 when I came out to the desert from Manhattan. And I went full-time like 14 years ago, something like that. But full-time for me is just 30 hours a week. And that's really where I do, if you want to call it my activism, that's pretty generous of you to call it that. Really, I'm just sort of a wage slave who edits things, and I don't really, participate in a lot of direct action or anything. There are people I work with who do excellent work of that kind, and a lot of scientists, a lot of lawyers I work with, but I'm really just a writer and editor there. And so I have that part of my life, and then I have the part where I write books and other things for myself. And really, before the pandemic, it was really hard because I had to drive my children to school, and drive them back and drive them to their extracurricular activities and that kind of thing. Before the pandemic, it was really hard to get, even an hour and a half of writing done a day. And so for me, a silver lining of shelter in place has sort of been that because I don't have to do all that driving, I can work, twice a day, maybe for an hour and a half twice a day. I don't know how interesting that is to anyone listening, though, but I do. I do certainly wish us all to return to three-dimensional social life with each other and to emerge at the other end of this tunnel. But it has been nice not to have to drive my children everywhere for so much of every day, because I live out in the middle of the desert, and so we're far away from their schools and from everything they do, and it just takes a long time, all that driving. So
I'm sure there are a lot of
thing
people. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, not at all.
I was going to say there are probably a lot of people in the audience who can relate to that. And it's one of the things we don't talk about in the pandemic, because nobody wants the pandemic. Everybody wants to get back to, IRL, to real life, three-dimensional life. And at the same time, I think there are maybe some side benefits that we can carry with us when we start to open back up. And one of them is that the pandemic has given us back time, for writers especially. All of the things that I don't do that I miss, like public speaking and traveling to public speaking and going to different cities and sort of getting glossied up for public speaking. I now do sitting at home all the time. So it takes me 5 minutes to get ready instead of 2 days to go to a place. And I miss it desperately. And at the same time, I'm so grateful to have the time back to do other things. And so our lives have shifted into new shapes, I feel. Has this affected your writing routine in addition to giving you time back?
Gosh, I guess what you say kind of resonates about just sort of how we used to have to go out into the world to promote our books, and now we're not doing that. So I haven't done that for this book, and that is a strange thing. It's strange not to encounter your readers like face to face anymore. And I guess I missed that. I didn't know how much I liked it, I guess, actually encountering people in real life around, books and reading and stuff. But I think other than that, it's only been a kind of, mild benefit to me that I got to stay home more in terms of my writing. It just gave me that extra bit of time I needed that normally is spent in a car.
Mm-hmm. I listened to a lot more books and therefore read a lot more books when I was traveling more, because that's my audio time. I, now do that walking the dog. I listen to a lot of books and don't want to talk to my neighbors because I'm caught up in some fictional dream. But I do think that gift of time is something it would be helpful to try and protect. And yet you're a writer's writer. You stay home with more time, you write more books. I'm a reader's writer and I just want to be out meeting people. I'm kind of a hoe that way. I just want to get to the microphone and meet people and sign books. So I'm looking forward to that. Speaking of your readers, what has the feedback been like for a children's Bible? And do you ever get pushback from climate change deniers?
So all the feedback has been really, really generous so far. I'm surprised. I'm surprised that people have been willing to read a book about sort of chaos when we've been in chaos, and I've been kind of delighted that they were willing to read it as much as they have been. So, but I have to say I have not had any like hate mail, and I think that's because the people who end up reading books like this aren't the same people who would write the hate mail in the first place. I think the book isn't enough of a crossover to actually end up in, say, Ted Cruz's library or whatever. I don't think that that it quite has had that sort of cross-cultural reach, and I'm not surprised by that because everything is so schismatic now in American culture. I don't feel like there are a lot of climate deniers, say, sitting down to read the kind of books I write, or indeed books about climate change in general. And it would be great if that were to shift. That would be lovely. And I would love to do anything I could to help out, sort of like help promote a conversation between the really sort of diametrically opposed parts of the culture. But really, no one's inviting me to to play that role. I feel like, because we're so opposed to each other these days culturally.
It's very hard. I had a dear friend who is a climate scientist who very early on, maybe 2014 or 2015, started showing me data that he said proved there was no such thing as climate change, when I would look at these graphs and clearly see temperatures rising over time. And I said to him, I failed math in school, so maybe I'm reading these wrong, but the data you're showing me is disproving what you're saying. And it sort of devolved down to a point at which we simply believe different things. I perceived climate change as a fact, and he said it wasn't. And I was very deeply disturbed by that, because he's a really well-respected scientist, a man I respect as a scientist. And so I'm wondering if, because you've been involved in this subject for such a respectably long time, have you encountered anybody prior to our present polarization whom you thought, oh, I can maybe reach this person or have a dialogue with this person? Like, where do we meet? Where do we start to meet?
I mean, that's always such a good question, and I wish I had a good answer to it. I feel that we're generally so um, siloed, I guess, is the trendy term for it these days, that that we rarely even encounter. I mean, I encounter a lot of climate scientists and lawyers who work on climate change because I work with a lot of them, but also that those are, that are definitely outside the advocacy community. And as we know, statistically, 96, 97% of scientists believe that climate change is anthropogenic and is occurring and all that kind of stuff. So certainly there are outliers, but I would have to say, like, the place I'd be most likely to encounter real sort of culture war, culture clash, conflicts would just be like in my neighborhood, if I actually talk to my neighbors, because I live out in this rural setting. Um, or, actually, and I've been writing about this at the sort of the local bar, which is called the Wagon Wheel Saloon. There, I certainly, if I wanted to get into it with people, would find much to disagree about. So that's really just like where I live, is actually the more sort of more unfamiliar culturally, even though I've been here so long, to me, than any of the other places that I find myself.
Is that uncomfortable, that the place that you actually physically live in, you're a bit, I mean, out of water is the wrong phrase to use about the desert, but that you feel a bit demographically out of place with the people you live among?
I used to sort of savor it, because I was just interested in, I liked not feeling like there was a writer at every street corner, the way I did when I lived in New York. And I like sort of the isolation of it and just the feeling of otherness. And I still like those things in some ways, but at the same time, starting in 2016 with Trump's election, I actually felt more troubled by what I saw out here in the desert. I'm not really talking about Tucson, which I live outside Tucson. Tucson is a blue city. It's majority Latino. It's not really like the surrounding parts of the state. And out where I live feels, it just feels kind of more reactionary. But I never kind of internalized that until the past 4 years. And it does sometimes now feel to me like there's so much out there that I don't understand. So many trucks with Confederate battle flags on them, or, white power decals. And that is, I felt that more deeply. It's upset me. It's distressed me more in the past few years than it ever had before.
Do you think your neighbors know that they have a famous and accomplished writer living in their midst who writes books about extinction crises?
Definitely not. Definitely not. And also, I don't think they would be impressed, moreover.
I've always wondered this. I have a family house in very rural Minnesota, and some of the neighbors who are in book clubs, I correspond with frequently about books, and we talk about books, and they know, what I'm working on, and we stay in pretty good contact. And other neighbors, I think somebody wrote to me once and said, like, nobody really cares that, there's an author living down the street, and most of us don't know. It was when I was being very vocal about my more liberal political views. And I thought, oh, that's probably true. I'm not that important. And yet I felt this great sort of sense of discomfort of being out of my own bubble. And yet I feel as though is that your pug?
Yes.
Hi, baby.
One sec, you guys.
My dog just got roused himself from his puppy stupor, his drugged puppy stupor.
Really? Yes. Did he hear the barking?
He did.
Awesome.
He did. It's like when he hears dogs on TV and he's like, play time? Not play time, interview time, go back to sleep. But yes. Exactly. So yeah, I feel as though it gave me valuable information about why people might not believe what I believe, that I carry with me back to the East. But I also find it deeply disturbing because the reasons I see people not believing what I believe, I don't believe in, if that makes sense. Just
Yeah, sure.
the data sets are very, very different. I wanted to ask about the fact that you chose to give your book a teen narrator, and I was wondering about that choice, like what drove you to do that. But also I was thinking about, of course, Greta Thunberg, and thinking like, are you feeling inspired by it's really teen activism, but by young people's activism? I hate to say young people because it makes me sound like I'm about 8,000 years old, but how
I
do you
know.
think about the youth these days?
Yeah, I have to say, I hate saying teen. I hate saying teenager. I I hate saying youth. Like I feel really uncomfortable using those terms because I don't really know. Like I was talking to my daughter about this, who's 17, and there's no like preferred term for her either. Like it all sounds, I don't know. It's
Like
nothing's
when you
perfect.
say young woman, it sounds like you're scolded. I mean,
Right.
I think about
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
cousin Vinny, where the judge says, "Hey, the two Utes." Like the two Utes came into the courtroom, and the judge says, "What is a Ute?" That's kind of how I would like to refer to young people, so that I don't sound ancient. The
Yeah.
Utes. So,
Exactly.
how do you think about the Utes these days in this movement?
Well, I do. I am actually really inspired by a lot of what I see in Sunrise Movement and Extinction Rebellion and all that stuff. I think it's great, and I think it's long overdue. And I actually wrote this book before Greta Thunberg was so well known, or Thunberg, or however you say it. But by, of course, by the time it came out, she was very famous, and it was sort of the automatic association. But I think she's great, and I think not only her, but all this sort of other. There's so many, young actually are relatively high profile on climate and on extinction to a lesser degree, and I just think it's great. I think they rock, and I sort of wanted to. I hadn't seen really before that sort of that generational divide be expressed in fiction around climate. That sort of like my generation versus youth, or youth versus my generation. I just hadn't seen that, and I wanted to explore that a bit. What sort of how that kind of anger can be so powerful and so actually admirable. Anger can be so many different things. It can be so reprehensible and frightening, or it can be so pure and really actually idealistic and creative.
It can be galvanizing.
Yeah.
And empowering if you are faced with a choice between apathy and anger. I think anger is always better, especially with the kind of crises that we're facing.
Well, especially when it's the kind of anger or rage that is about protecting others rather than just defending the self, or defending the sort of like the fortress of belief and prejudice that one has built up around oneself, right?
One of the beautiful things that you do in a children's Bible is that, in addition to this sort of typical Ute indignation and anger at the parents and finding the parents just ectoplasmically disgusting, there is such a current of tenderness in it as well. Like one of the characters, when he sees that the landscape is literally changing and being threatened by the storm, starts to create sort of a Noah's Ark and to rescue the animals from the grounds of this mansion in a very piecemeal and sort of dangerous way, because he's just a kid. He doesn't know better that, you could get rabies from these animals. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the coupling of tenderness / compassion and that righteous anger, which one of the reviews you had, I think it was a Kirkus review, said like this book is so beautifully like righteously angry, and it is, and you need that sort of clarion call, but there's also this slower movement of compassion that runs alongside it. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, I think for me, tenderness is always the default, and I'm really bad at being angry. I can be I can certainly be annoyed, and I can be sulky, but like I didn't really grow up with a lot of anger expressed in my family, and I'm still not good at it. Like I'm not sure I could punch someone, even if I really wanted to. I'm just.
I could punch them. I'll punch them for you.
That's good. I support it. I'm not really cut out for it, but I am cut out for sort of like melancholy and sort of meditative, like for longing, really, longing and nostalgia. And those are things that I really dwell in constantly, longing, right? Longing and homesickness and sort of, I don't know, sort of a dreamy relationship to the past and to what isn't. So that is something I couldn't help embedding in this book. And especially when you're talking about, or writing about or thinking about the losses of extinction, the loss of people, the loss of, in this case, there's also kind of it's not a loss of respect for the parents because they haven't really had the respect to start out with. But over the course of the book, these youths actually have to become sort of the parents of their parents and there's sort of this reversal that happens. And there's a kind of not really forgiveness, but sort of gentleness that they come to around the parents that they once only saw in terms of resentment and yeah, as you say, disgust or ectoplasmic repulsion or whatever it was, because the parents are weak and are self-indulgent and are not capable really of protecting their own children. But the children become somewhat capable of protecting their parents as the book goes on. And so, yeah, so there's a kind of evolution, right, in them.
There seems to be just a sense of irrevocability with the loss you present in the book. In Station 11, which is one of my favorite dystopian novels, one of the main characters comments on how spoiled people used to be that they could press a button on a computer and a product would appear at their doors when they're traveling through a landscape and they don't have electricity or hot food or safety. None of these things are taken for granted. And yet in Station 11, there are these slivers of hope embedded in the plot that maybe those things could come back. Do you feel as though in a children's Bible, anything can grow back, or do you feel like the world is on an irrevocable decline?
Well, things always return. I think the question is, what role will we play in preserving them so that we keep them in our lives? Things always return, but it's over deep time, right? It's not in human time. And so, so I think our task is to really think down the generations and think about wanting the next ones to live in a world that's still as rich and incredible and strange as the one we live in now, rather than a sort of tedious monoculture of a world, a world of homogeneity, sameness. And I don't think that's where we want to live as a species. And so if we don't want to live there forever, now's the time for us to step up, right?
That sounds like somebody who might work for a center of biodiversity. I'm putting these things together. So we are starting to get some audience questions. One of them is from one of our top fans, Anissa. Hi, Anissa. I love when she's on, and she's always on. What are some of the books you're enjoying now, and what are you working on next? So actually 2 questions for you.
For me? Okay, sure. Well, I'm actually working on a nonfiction book now, which I'm calling it's called We Loved It All, a bestiary. So it's kind of based on the illustrated collections of fables about animals that were popular with, Christian readers in the Middle Ages. It's kind of based on that, in that it's about all kinds of different critters, but it's also sort of part memoir and about my own life. Yeah, so I'm working on that. I have also a novel called Dinosaurs. That is it's kind of a short novel, a really simple novel that I've done, I guess. But I'm not sure which of those will come out next. I'm not sure. And then for what I'm reading, well, I am actually reading a science fiction book right now because I have to be on a panel. I have to moderate a panel with the climate scientist Michael Mann, who has a new book out called The New Climate War. So I just read that, which is about fossil fuel industry campaigns against sort of, renewable energy and all that. And then I'm also reading this big, long new book by Kim Stanley Robinson, which I haven't read sci-fi for a long time. but it's great. It's also about climate. It's called The Ministry for the Future. And what else am I reading? I've been reading so much nonfiction recently, which is not the usual thing for me because I've been doing research and, so not a lot of fiction to recommend from the past couple of months. I did really love this book this year called The New Wilderness by Diane Cook. Have you read that, Jenna? It's really,
I haven't,
really
but we did have her on the Blaze, I remember. Can you tell us about it a little?
It's really, it's a sort of future, it's speculative, it's a future thing. And it's, it's pretty apocalyptic. It's about a group of people in the sort of existing in maybe the only wilderness that remains and trying to survive there, when everything's sort of fallen down around them. It's just so good. I feel like it's a classic that everyone should be reading, and it's her first novel. And also, I'm really picky and mean, and I don't usually say such nice things about books. so it really is good. It really is good. I recommend it.
The New Wilderness, people, and hopefully one of our producers is putting the link in the chat so that you can pick it up if that sounds interesting. It does to me. I'm wondering, I have 2 more questions and then we will release you into your Friday evening. One of the questions is, you're saying you're reading a lot for research right now, which is nonfiction, and then some fiction that you read earlier this year. Do you tend to read novels that are mostly about what you're writing about, like the sort of dystopia, climate change, or is it across the board?
No, I don't at all. I read for language, so for me it's not about really content as much as whether I like the voice and the sentences and the way something is made. I find myself, I'm pretty judgmental, although I've tried to read new things, things that I'm not naturally drawn to. I try to do that. Otherwise you just sort of calcify and ossify, right? If you just insist on reading the same things again and again. So I do try to not be judgmental in my reading, because I think it's kind of the kiss of death as a reader to close yourself off to new things, right? Anyway, but I also do want to know what's out there, the same way that if you're and I'm sure you have this too, if you're I don't know, foot surgeon or something, you have to know what the other foot surgeons are doing to some degree, to not only to sort of stay abreast of the medicine or the technology, but also just so that you can see what isn't there, and can see a place for what you're doing in the rest of what already exists. Because I've never sort of wanted to repeat either myself or other people. So I like to be trying to do something new, and for that you have to read in your field. I think it's hard to find, it's hard to find things, it's hard to know what to read from the rest of the world, because there's so much out there, right? It's hard.
There is. And I think I'm loving what you're saying about the different reasons people read. Like, you're a wide read reader. Obviously, you read for curiosity, you read for language, you read for research, you read to see what your contemporaries are doing. And I often read for comfort food as well, that I have books that I return to over and over that are sort of like thumb-sucking books for me. And yet they show me something different every time I read them. Do you have a book that's like that you return to over and over? That's kind of your Bible, like the Lydia Millet Bible?
I have things from childhood that are like that.
Like what? What's your favorite?
Well, from early childhood, always Dr. Seuss and the Lorax, which the Lorax is basically what all my books want to be based on, right? So, but then the Narnia books, C.S. Lewis, I was really devoted to as a child, and still love them. I still love them. More recently, like Philip Pullman, The Golden Compass, which is like sort of the secular answer to C.S. Lewis, right? Because that's like they've been made into a movie and things like that as well. Those things I return to, and some sort of more obscure children's books that are out of print, like Beverly Nichols, The Tree That Sat Down, that trilogy. But as an adult, yeah, I mean, certain writers are I'm just really sort of devoted to. Like Lydia Davis, I think is great, and Thomas Bernhardt, the Austrian writer. But I'm not sure how many times I reread, because I'm always trying to find other people to read who I haven't read yet. Although I shouldn't, I make myself sound much more like voracious than I am. I'm actually lazy. So which is just to say I don't reread things as much as I might. I think that it would probably be instructive for me to reread some of my favorite things more often. I read so much for work. And I don't know, maybe you guys out there have similar experiences, but I read so much for work that sometimes I'm just exhausted by words even. And I have to stop, looking at words for the day.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely feel the same way. I read a lot for Blaze because I have the privilege of interviewing many wonderful writers and want to actually read the books. And then I also read for work, for novel workshop, for client manuscripts, for quotes, providing quotes for authors' books. And so there are very few moments in my day where I can gravitate to a book that I simply came to by choice or by curiosity. Mm-hmm. And by that time I read maybe 2 pages and then I fall asleep. So I have become sort of a slow reader, but I also have a lot of influences coming in, which I think is good. And every season I reread. I'm a seasonal rereader, I think. So every fall I reread Pet Sematary, which I am a Stephen King aficionado. Every summer, I was just telling one of our producers this, I reread The Stand, which is like my favorite dystopian fiction of all time. And so it was sort of in the vein of The Stand that I came to the children's Bible. I'm fascinated by stories in which the world we know is decimated, and how do people react afterwards. And I would definitely put children's Bible up with The Stand, with Station 11, with The Dog Stars by Peter Heller, some of the books that I love about our world being rearranged in this cautionary vein. I know we have another audience question, and okay. Do you want to talk about the novel being optioned for TV? That was beautifully put, Stacy. Thank you. Do you want to talk about that?
I think that was in the news or something, right? It's not a secret, right? Please remind me. No. I don't even remember. Yeah, it has been optioned, and like with everything in Hollywood, you don't really know what's going to happen, right? Like I'm eager to see what happens there, but I just feel, several of my books have been optioned in the past, and no movies have yet come to be from them. I think it would be incredibly fun and exciting, right, for something visual to be made out of one of my books. And Jenna, have you had that experience? Has something of yours I can't remember, being made into stuff that's visual?
No, but it's been optioned. Thank you for asking. My first book, Those Who Save Us, has been under option for like 12 years, I want to say. And the producers keep re-optioning it, which basically, for people who aren't familiar with the terminology, means that somebody's renting your intellectual property to try and get a team together to make it into a series or make it into a movie. So the producer is still working on getting that together. And I had my second book, The Storm Chasers, optioned also in Canada, I want to say. And it's always just such like a lovely gift and a little dream that you have for a while, and you walk around casting the movie in your mind and figuring out which scene you want to be shown at the Oscars and like what you wear at the Oscars. And my whole thing is, can I please have this happen while I'm young enough to look good in a backless dress? And then I think, you're always going to look good in a backless dress. You're never too old for a backless dress. So bring it on, producers, right? So, but I would love to see children's Bible made into a movie. Have you cast this in your mind? Do you know who would play who?
No, I haven't done any of that. I haven't sort of fantasized about it in that way, because I think it is really fun to have something optioned, and it's certainly nicer than not having something optioned, right? But but I also never. It's happened so many times now that it's really hard for me to even kind of picture. And I don't really think in terms of like what actor would play whom or anything like that. Although I have a couple of times in the past. I can't bring it to mind. I can't bring the examples to mind, but I have sort of, I'm capable of fantasizing, but I haven't with this one because it's hard for, it's like there aren't many actors of that age, right, that I know well enough to sort of place in that scene, place in the scene of I think it would be good if they were sort of less known actors, actually. I could see some of the parent characters being played by more like, obviously more experienced because older, but like sort of, aging stars or something. But
I can cast all the parents for you. The parents are very dissipated in the novel, you guys. So they drink all the time. And basically when the climate starts to shift and it becomes apparent that a cataclysm is en route, the parents call for bourbon. They're like, okay, we need liquor deliveries. I'm like, right on, man. In fact, I think there should be a children's Bible cocktail made specifically for this novel. So maybe we can come up with that for you. But I was thinking, okay, I would love to see like John Hamm, skulking around in a wife beater or undershirt somewhere in the mansion. And then Alec Baldwin kind of like throwing his weight around in this totally ineffective way. Those are my only suggestions so far. If you guys have read a children's Bible or after you read a children's Bible, please send your casting suggestions to us at A Mighty Blaze, and we will pass them to Lydia for when the movie gets made.
That would be really fun. That'd be really fun. I would love to get people's casting ideas. And also, I think it's much easier to cast the parents and much more fun. The children would sort of, they're more soulful and they would actually have to be just really good actors, I think.
Yeah. Those of you working with the Utes out there, the Ute actors, if you're familiar with the Ute actors, send us your suggestions. We would love that. Well, we cannot wait to see the movie version. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that this option pays out. And whether it does or whether it doesn't, this book is such a treat. It's cautionary and yet it's wildly entertaining. It's important. So everybody buy at least 5 copies of a children's Bible and check out all of Lydia's other books, which again, 8 of them have been nominated for Pulitzer Prizes. So I think you should check them out now. And Lydia, thank you so much for spending your time with us this afternoon and letting me ask you all of these nosy writer fangirl questions.
No, it's been really fun. Thank you for having me on, and thanks for listening/watching, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.